There Are No Guilty People by Graf Leo Tolstoy. 1. Mine is a strange and wonderful lot. The chances are that there is not a single wretched beggar, suffering under the luxury and oppression of the rich, who feels anything like as keenly as I do either the injustice, the cruelty, and the horror of their oppression of, and contempt for the poor, or the grinding humiliation and misery which befall the great majority of the workers, the real producers of all that makes life possible. I have felt this for a long time, and as the years have passed by the feeling has grown and grown, until recently it reached its climax. Although I feel all this so vividly, I still live on amid the depravity and sins of rich society, and I cannot leave it, because I have neither the knowledge nor the strength to do so. I do not know how to change my life so that my physical needs, food, sleep, clothing, my going to and fro, may be satisfied without a sense of shame and wrongdoing in the position which I fill. There was a time when I tried to change my position, which was not in harmony with my conscience, but the conditions created by the past, by my family and its claims upon me, were so complicated that they would not let me out of their grasp, or rather, I did not know how to free myself. I had not the strength. Now that I am over 80 and have become feeble, I have given up trying to free myself, and strange to say, as my feebleness increases, I realize more and more strongly the wrongfulness of my position, and it grows more and more intolerable to me. It has occurred to me that I do not occupy this position for nothing, that Providence intended that I should lay bare the truth of my feelings, so that I might atone for all that causes my suffering, and might perhaps open the eyes of those, or at least of some of those, who are still blind to what I see so clearly, and thus might lighten the burden of that vast majority who, under existing conditions, are subjected to bodily and spiritual suffering by those who deceive them and also deceive themselves. Indeed, it may be that the position which I occupy gives me special facilities for revealing the artificial and criminal relations which exist between men, for telling the whole truth in regard to that position, without confusing the issue by attempting to vindicate myself, and without rousing the envy of the rich and feelings of oppression in the hearts of the poor and downtrodden. I am so placed that I not only have no desire to vindicate myself, but on the contrary, I find it necessary to make an effort lest I should exaggerate the wickedness of the great among whom I live, of whose society I am ashamed, whose attitude towards their fellow men I detest with my whole soul, though I find it impossible to separate my lot from theirs. But I must also avoid the error of those democrats and others who, in defending the oppressed and the enslaved, do not see their failings and mistakes, and who do not make sufficient allowance for the difficulties created, the mistakes inherited from the past, which in a degree lessens the responsibility of the upper classes. Free from desire for self-vindication, free from fear of an emancipated people, free from that envy and hatred which the oppressed feel for their oppressors, I am in the best possible position to see the truth and to tell it. Perhaps that is why Providence placed me in such a position. I will do my best to turn it to account. Chapter 2. Alexander Ivanovich Volgin, a bachelor and a clerk in a Moscow bank at a salary of 8,000 rubles a year, a man much respected in his own set, was staying in a country house. His host was a wealthy landowner, owning some 2,500 acres, and had married his guest's cousin. Awaking next morning at 8, he put on his slippers and dressing gown and rang the bell. The old butler, Stephen, the father of a family and the grandfather of 6 grandchildren, who had served in that house for 30 years, entered the room hurriedly, with bent legs, carrying in the newly blackened boots which Volgin had taken off the night before, well-brushed suit and a clean shirt. The guest thanked him, and then asked what the weather was like. The blinds were drawn so that the sun should not prevent anyone from sleeping till 11 o'clock if he were so inclined, and whether his hosts had slept well. He glanced at his watch, it was still early, and began to wash and dress. His water was ready, and everything on the washing stand and dressing table was ready for use and properly laid out. His soap, his tooth and hair brushes, his nail scissors and files. He washed his hands and face in a leisurely fashion, cleaned and manicured his nails, pushed back the skin with the towel, and sponged his stout white body from head to foot. Then he began to brush his hair. Standing in front of the mirror, he first brushed his curly beard, which was beginning to turn grey, with 2 English brushes, parting it down the middle. Then he combed his hair, which was already showing signs of getting thin, with a large tortoiseshell comb, putting on his underlinen, his socks, his boots, his trousers, which were held up by elegant braces, and his waistcoat. He sat down coatless in an easy chair to rest after dressing, lit a cigarette, and began to think where he should go for a walk that morning, to the park or to Littleport's, What a funny name for a wood. He thought he would go to Littleport's. Then he must answer Simon Nishalievich's letter, but there was time enough for that. Getting up with an air of resolution, he took out his watch. It was already 5 minutes to 9. He put his watch into his waistcoat pocket, and his purse, with all that was left of the 180 rubles he had taken for his journey, and for the incidental expenses of his fortnight's stay with his cousin, and then he placed into his trouser pocket his cigarette case and electric cigarette lighter, and 2 clean handkerchiefs into his coat pockets, and went out of the room, leaving as usual the mess and confusion which he had made to be cleared up by Stephen, an old man of over 50. Stephen expected Valjean to remunerate him, as he said, being so accustomed to the work that he did not feel the slightest repugnance for it. Glancing at a mirror, and feeling satisfied with his appearance, Valjean went into the dining room. There, thanks to the efforts of the housekeeper, the footman and under-butler, the latter had risen at dawn in order to run home to sharpen his son's scythe. Breakfast was ready. On a spotless white cloth stood a boiling, shiny silver samovar, at least it looked like silver, a coffee pot, hot milk, cream, butter, and all sorts of fancy white bread and biscuits. The only persons at table were the second son of the house, his tutor a student, and the secretary. The host, who was an active member of the Zemstvo and a great farmer, had already left the house, having gone at 8 o'clock to attend to his work. Valjean, while drinking his coffee, talked to the student and the secretary about the weather, and yesterday's vint, and discussed Theodorate's peculiar behaviour the night before, as he had been very rude to his father without the slightest cause. Theodorate was the grown-up son of the house, and a ne'er-do-well. His name was Theodore, but someone had once called him Theodorate either as a joke or to tease him, and as it seemed funny, the name stuck to him, although his doings were no longer in the least amusing. So it was now. He had been to the university but left it in his 2nd year, and joined a regiment of horse guards. But he gave that up also, and was now living in the country, doing nothing, finding fault, and feeling discontented with everything. Theodorate was still in bed. So were the other members of the household, Anna Mikhailovna, its mistress, her sister, the widow of a general, and a landscape painter who lived with the family. Valjean took his Panama hat from the hall table. It had cost 20 rubles, and his cane with its carved ivory handle, and went out. Crossing the veranda, gay with flowers, he walked through the flower garden, in the centre of which was a raised round bed, with rings of red, white, and blue flowers, and the initials of the mistress of the house done in carpet bedding in the centre. Leaving the flower garden, Valjean entered the avenue of lime trees, hundreds of years old, which peasant girls were tidying and sweeping with spades and brooms. The gardener was busy measuring, and a boy was bringing something in a cart. Passing these, Valjean went into the park of at least 125 acres, filled with fine old trees, and intersected by a network of well-kept walks. Smoking as he strolled, Valjean took his favourite path past the summer house into the fields beyond. It was pleasant in the park, but it was still nicer in the fields. On the right, some women who were digging potatoes formed a mass of bright red and white colour. On the left were wheat fields, meadows, and grazing cattle, and in the foreground, slightly to the right, were the dark, dark oaks of Littleport's. Valjean took a deep breath, and felt glad that he was alive, especially here in his cousin's home, where he was so thoroughly enjoying the rest from his work at the bank. Lucky people to live in the country, he thought. True, what with his farming and his Zemstvo, the owner of the estate has very little peace even in the country, but that is his own lookout. Valjean shook his head, lit another cigarette, and stepping out firmly with his powerful feet clad in his thick English boots, began to think of the heavy winter's work in the bank that was in front of him. I shall be there every day from 10 to 2, sometimes even till 5, and the board meetings, and private interviews with clients, then the Duma, whereas here, it is delightful. It may be a little dull, but it is not for long. He smiled. After a stroll in Littleport's, he turned back, going straight across a fallow field which was being ploughed. A herd of cows, calves, sheep, and pigs, which belonged to the village community, was grazing there. The shortest way to the park was to pass through the herd. He frightened the sheep, which ran away one after another, and were followed by the pigs, of which 2 little ones stared solemnly at him. The shepherd boy called to the sheep and cracked his whip. How far behind Europe we are, thought Valjean, recalling his frequent holidays abroad. You would not find a single cow like that anywhere in Europe. Then, wanting to find out where the path which branched off from the one he was on led to, and who was the owner of the herd, he called to the boy. Whose herd is it? The boy was so filled with wonder, verging on terror, when he gazed at the hat, the well-brushed beard, and above all the gold-rimmed eyeglasses, that he could not reply at once. When Valjean repeated his question, the boy pulled himself together and said, Ours. But whose is ours? Said Valjean, shaking his head and smiling. The boy was wearing shoes of plaited birch bark, bands of linen round his legs, a dirty, unbleached shirt ragged at the shoulder, and a cap the peak of which had been torn. "Whose is ours?" "The Pirogov village herd." "How old are you?" "I don't know." "Can you read?" "No, I can't." "Didn't you go to school?" "Yes, I did." "Couldn't you learn to read?" "No." "Where does that path lead?" The boy told him, and Valjean went on towards the house, thinking how he would chaff Nicholas Petrovitch about the deplorable condition of the village schools, in spite of all his efforts. On approaching the house, Valjean looked at his watch, and saw that it was already past 11. He remembered that Nicholas Petrovitch was going to drive to the nearest town, and that he had meant to give him a letter to post to Moscow, but the letter was not written. The letter was a very important one to a friend, asking him to bid for him for a picture of the Madonna which was to be offered for sale at an auction. As he reached the house, he saw at the door 4 big, well-fed, well-groomed, thoroughbred horses harnessed to a carriage, the black lacquer of which glistened in the sun. The coachman was seated on the box in a caftan, with a silver belt, and the horses were jingling their silver bells from time to time. A bare-headed, barefooted peasant in a ragged caftan stood at the front door. He bowed. Valjean asked what he wanted. "I have come to see Nicholas Petrovitch." "What about?" "Because I am in distress, my horse has died." Valjean began to question him. The peasant told him how he was situated. He had 5 children, and this had been his only horse. Now it was gone. He wept. "What are you going to do?" "To beg," and he knelt down, and remained kneeling in spite of Valjean's expostulations. "What is your name?" "Dmitri Sudarikov," answered the peasant, still kneeling. Valjean took 3 rubles from his purse and gave them to the peasant, who showed his gratitude by touching the ground with his forehead, and then went into the house. His host was standing in the hall. "Where is your letter?" he asked, approaching Valjean. "I am just off." "I'm awfully sorry, I'll write it this minute if you will let me. I forgot all about it. It's so pleasant here that one can forget anything." "All right, but do be quick. The horses have already been standing a quarter of an hour and the flies are biting viciously. Can you wait, Arsenty?" he asked the coachman. "Why not?" said the coachman, thinking to himself. "Why do they order the horses when they aren't ready? The rush the grooms and I had, just to stand here and feed the flies." Directly. Valjean went towards his room, but turned back to ask Nicholas Petrovitch about the begging peasant. "Did you see him? He's a drunkard, but still he is to be pitied. Do be quick." Valjean got out his case, with all the requisites for writing, wrote the letter, made out a cheque for 180 rubles, and sealing down the envelope, took it to Nicholas Petrovitch. "Goodbye." Valjean read the newspapers till luncheon. He only read the liberal papers, the Russian Gazette, Speech, sometimes the Russian Word, but he would not touch the New Times, to which his host subscribed. While he was scanning at his ease the political news, the Tsar's doings, the doings of president and ministers and decisions in the Duma, and was just about to pass on to the general news, theatres, science, murders and cholera, he heard the luncheon bell ring. Thanks to the efforts of upwards of 10 human beings, counting laundresses, gardeners, cooks, kitchen maids, butlers and footmen, the table was sumptuously laid for 8, with silver water jugs, decanters, kvass, wine, mineral waters, cut glass and fine table linen, while 2 men servants were continually hurrying to and fro, bringing in and serving, and then clearing away the hors d'oeuvre and the various hot and cold courses. The hostess talked incessantly about everything that she had been doing, thinking and saying, and she evidently considered that everything that she thought, said, or did was perfect, and that it would please everyone except those who were fools. Valjean felt and knew that everything she said was stupid, but it would never do to let it be seen, and so he kept up the conversation. Theodorite was glum and silent. The student occasionally exchanged a few words with the widow. Now and again there was a pause in the conversation, and then Theodorite interposed, and everyone became miserably depressed. At such moments the hostess ordered some dish that had not been served, and the footman hurried off to the kitchen or to the housekeeper and hurried back again. Nobody felt inclined either to talk or to eat, but they all forced themselves to eat and to talk, and so luncheon went on. The peasant who had been begging because his horse had died was named Dmitri Sudarikov. He had spent the whole day before he went to the squire over his dead horse. First of all he went to the knacker, Sanin, who lived in a village near. The knacker was out, but he waited for him, and it was dinner time when he had finished bargaining over the price of the skin. Then he borrowed a neighbour's horse to take his own to a field to be buried, as it is forbidden to bury dead animals near a village. Adrian would not lend his horse because he was getting in his potatoes, but Stephen took pity on Mitri and gave way to his persuasion. He even lent a hand in lifting the dead horse into the cart. Mitri tore off the shoes from the forelegs and gave them to his wife. One was broken, but the other one was whole. While he was digging the grave with a spade which was very blunt, the knacker appeared and took off the skin, and the carcass was then thrown into the hole and covered up. Mitri felt tired and went into Matrena's hut, where he drank half a bottle of vodka with Sanin to console himself. Then he went home, quarrelled with his wife and lay down to sleep on the hay. He did not undress but slept just as he was, with a ragged coat for a coverlet. His wife was in the hut with the girls. There were 4 of them, and the youngest was only 5 weeks old. Mitri woke up before dawn as usual. He groaned as the memory of the day before broke in upon him, how the horse had struggled and then fallen down. Now there was no horse, and all he had was the price of the skin, 4 rubles and 80 kopecks. Getting up, he arranged the linen bands on his legs and went through the yard into the hut. His wife was putting straw into the stove with one hand, with the other she was holding a baby girl to her breast, which was hanging out of her dirty chemise. Mitri crossed himself 3 times, turning towards the corner in which the icons hung, and repeated some utterly meaningless words, which he called prayers to the Trinity and the Virgin, the Creed and Our Father. "Isn't there any water?" "The girl's gone for it. I've got some tea. Will you go up to the squire?" "Yes, I'd better." The smoke from the stove made him cough. He took a rag off the wooden bench and went into the porch. The girl had just come back with the water. Mitri filled his mouth with water from the pail and squirted it out on his hands, took some more in his mouth to wash his face, dried himself with the rag, then parted and smoothed his curly hair with his fingers and went out. A little girl of about 10 with nothing on but a dirty shirt came towards him. "Good morning, Uncle Mitri," she said. "You are to come and thrash." "All right, I'll come," replied Mitri. He understood that he was expected to return the help given the week before by Kumishkir, a man as poor as he was himself, when he was thrashing his own corn with a horse-driven machine. "Tell them I'll come at lunch-time. I've got to go to Ugrumi." Mitri went back to the hut and, changing his birch-bark shoes and the linen bands on his legs, started off to see the squire. After he had got 3 rubles from Volgin and the same sum from Nicholas Petrovitch, he returned to his house, gave the money to his wife and went to his neighbours. The thrashing machine was humming, and the driver was shouting. The lean horses were going slowly round him, straining at their traces. The driver was shouting to them in a monotone, "Now there, my dears." Some women were unbinding sheaves, others were raking up the scattered straw and ears, and others again were gathering great armfuls of corn and handing them to the men to feed the machine. The work was in full swing. In the kitchen garden which Mitri had to pass, a girl, clad only in a long shirt, was digging potatoes which she put into a basket. "Where's your grandfather?" asked Mitri. "He's in the barn." Mitri went to the barn and set to work at once. The old man of 80 knew of Mitri's trouble. After greeting him, he gave him his place to feed the machine. Mitri took off his ragged coat, laid it out of the way near the fence, and then began to work vigorously, raking the corn together and throwing it into the machine. The work went on without interruption until the dinner hour. The cocks had crowed 2 or 3 times, but no one paid any attention to them, not because the workers did not believe them, but because they were scarcely heard for the noise of the work and the talk about it. At last the whistle of the squire's steam thrasher sounded 3 miles away, and then the owner came into the barn. He was a straight old man of 80. "It's time to stop," he said. "It's dinner time." Those at work seemed to redouble their efforts. In a moment the straw was cleared away, the grain that had been thrashed was separated from the chaff and brought in, and then the workers went into the hut. The hut was smoke-begrimed, as its stove had no chimney, but it had been tidied up, and benches stood round the table, making room for all those who had been working, of whom there were 9, not counting the owners. Bread, soup, boiled potatoes, and kvass were placed on the table. An old one-armed beggar, with a bag slung over his shoulder, came in with a crutch during the meal. "Peace be to this house, a good appetite to you, for Christ's sake give me something." "God will give it to you," said the mistress, already an old woman and the daughter-in-law of the master. "Don't be angry with us." An old man who was still standing near the door said, "Give him some bread, Martha." "How can you?" I am only wondering whether we shall have enough. Oh, it is wrong, Martha. God tells us to help the poor, cut him a slice. Martha obeyed. The beggar went away. The man in charge of the thrashing machine got up, said grace, thanked his hosts and went away to rest. Mitri did not lie down but ran to the shop to buy some tobacco. He was longing for a smoke. While he smoked he chatted to a man from Demensk, asking the price of cattle, as he saw that he would not be able to manage without selling a cow. When he returned to the others, they were already back at work again, and so it went on till the evening. Among these downtrodden, duped and defrauded men, who are becoming demoralized by overwork, and being gradually done to death by underfeeding, there are men living who consider themselves Christians, and others so enlightened that they feel no further need for Christianity or for any religion, so superior do they appear in their own esteem, and yet their hideous, lazy lives are supported by the degrading, excessive labor of these slaves, not to mention the labor of millions of other slaves, toiling in factories to produce samovars, silver, carriages, machines, and the like for their use. They live among these horrors, seeing them and yet not seeing them, although often kind at heart, old men and women, young men and maidens, mothers and children, poor children who are being vitiated and trained into moral blindness. Here is a bachelor grown old, the owner of thousands of acres, who has lived a life of idleness, greed, and overindulgence, who reads the New Times, and is astonished that the government can be so unwise as to permit Jews to enter the university. There is his guest, formerly the governor of a province, now a senator with a big salary, who reads with satisfaction that a Congress of lawyers has passed a resolution in favor of capital punishment. Their political enemy, NP, reads a liberal paper, and cannot understand the blindness of the government in allowing the union of Russian men to exist. Here is a kind, gentle mother of a little girl reading a story to her about Fox, a dog that lamed some rabbits, and here is this little girl. During her walks she sees other children, barefooted, hungry, hunting for green apples that have fallen from the trees, and so accustomed is she to the sight, that these children do not seem to her to be children such as she is, but only part of the usual surroundings, the familiar landscape. Why is this?